Imagine a floating skyscraper, a massive cargo ship carrying hundreds of millions of dollars in valuable goods across the deep, vast ocean. It is an unstoppable titan of global trade, towering over the waves. Now, imagine this steel leviathan being conquered by just 4 guys. 4 guys in a tiny fiberglass dinghy, armed with nothing but rusty AK-47s, and a sketchy, homemade ladder hooked over the railing. It sounds completely absurd, like the plot of a terrible Hollywood action movie that you would watch on a Tuesday night. But in the late 2000s and early 2010s, this wasn't Hollywood fiction. This was the terrifying reality in the Gulf of Aden. Welcome to the bizarre, billion-dollar business of modern piracy. A world where desperate fishermen managed to hijack the global economy. To understand how we actually got here, we have to rewind the clock, all the way back to the year 1991. The location, the Horn of Africa. Somalia's government collapses completely. Poof. Gone. Almost overnight. The entire nation is plunged into total anarchy and a devastating civil war. With no functioning government, there was obviously no navy, and absolutely no coast guard to protect their extensive, resource-rich territorial waters. Foreign fishing fleets from all over the world noticed this massive blind spot. They swooped in like vultures to an unguarded buffet. These massive illegal trawlers began vacuuming up all the fish, using aggressive methods that destroyed the delicate coral reefs and marine ecosystems. Local Somali fishermen, who had relied on these waters for generations, suddenly watched their only source of livelihood completely disappear before their eyes. Desperate, hungry, and angry, some of these fishermen decided to take matters into their own hands. They formed armed, vigilante neighborhood watch groups. They called themselves the National Volunteer Coast Guard, boarding these illegal foreign ships and demanding a fine for stealing their local fish. But very quickly, they realized a dark truth. Demanding ransom money from captive ships was way more profitable than actually catching fish. As the 2000s rolled on, what started as a desperate defense of local waters mutated into a highly organized, booming criminal industry. The economic math was incredibly simple. On one side of the coast, you had a collapsed nation with 0 jobs and extreme poverty. But on the other side, just a few miles offshore, a trillion-dollar highway of global maritime trade sailed right past their front door. To capture a slice of that immense floating wealth, the pirate networks needed funding. They needed a solid business model. Enter the coastal town of Hijacked. It quickly transformed from a quiet, starving fishing village into the undisputed capital of modern piracy. The business became so sophisticated that in 2009, the locals actually set up a pirate stock exchange. Yes, a literal stock market for crime. If you wanted to launch a hijacking mission, you needed seed money, you needed boats, fuel, weapons, and food. So, you pitched to investors. Anyone in town could invest. You didn't even need cash. You could contribute a rocket-propelled grenade, an assault rifle, or even just some fuel for the crew. Wealthy warlords and successful pirate bosses became the venture capitalists of Somalia, funding multiple maritime raids at once to cleverly diversify their portfolios. The rules were brutal. If a mission failed or the pirates were captured, the investors lost all their capital. High risk, absolutely zero insurance. But if the mission succeeded and a multi-million-dollar ransom was paid by the shipping company, the investors got a massive, life-changing cut of the profits. With the funding secured, the pirate fleet was assembled, and shockingly, it was incredibly cheap to build. They used a mothership, usually a previously hijacked fishing boat. This served as a floating base, secretly towing 2 small, lightning-fast fiberglass skiffs deep into the ocean. These tiny attack boats were heavily equipped with modern tech. We're talking satellite phones and advanced GPS units to navigate the vast Indian Ocean. Their total investment was perhaps a few $1,000s, but the potential return, tens of millions. It was the ultimate asymmetric warfare. So, how exactly do 4 guys in a tiny boat capture a floating fortress? It all comes down to exploiting the giant's greatest weakness. You see, these massive cargo ships are absolute engineering marvels, but they were designed for economic efficiency, not for fending off maritime guerrilla attacks. The sheer scale of these vessels creates a massive tactical problem. They are incredibly difficult to maneuver and absolutely impossible to stop quickly. But the biggest flaw, blind spots. The command bridge is usually located all the way at the back, sitting high above towering stacks of shipping containers. This means the crew has absolutely zero visibility of the water directly below the rear quarters of the ship. It is a massive, highly vulnerable dead zone. Up on the bridge, the merchant marine crew is often completely unaware. They rely heavily on radar, which frequently fails to pick up small fiberglass skiffs. Meanwhile, down in the blind spot, the skiff must match the exact speed of the massive cargo ship, bouncing violently on the enormous, churning wake. They didn't use high-tech grappling hooks or Batman gadgets. Instead, they relied on cheap, lightweight aluminum ladders, often crudely extended with ropes and heavy metal hooks. Now comes the most dangerous part of the entire operation. They have to scale a sheer, vertical steel wall that is moving at 20 knots. With a massive, synchronized heave, the ladder is thrown high into the air. The crude metal hook slams over the top railing and catches tight. The moment it catches, there's no hesitation. The pirates scramble up the flimsy ladder like a swarm of heavily armed, desperate ants. If a pirate slips here, they are instantly swallowed by the churning ocean. There is zero margin for error. But once they reach the deck, a terrifying countdown begins. As the first pirate vaults over the railing, the element of surprise is finally broken. The ship's massive security perimeter has officially been breached. Loud, blaring emergency alarms suddenly echo across the decks. Up on the bridge, the terrified captain drops his coffee and desperately hits the general lockdown button. From this exact moment, a deadly race begins. The pirates have only a few minutes to capture the crew before they can lock themselves away in the safe room. This safe room is called the Citadel, a heavily reinforced, impenetrable steel bunker located deep inside the bowels of the cargo ship. If the crew makes it inside and cuts the engine power from within, the ship becomes completely useless to the pirates. They are effectively paralyzed in the water. But if the pirates are fast enough, and they successfully capture the bridge before the terrified crew can initiate the lockdown procedure, the billion-dollar ship is theirs. The pirates force the captain at gunpoint to turn the massive vessel around, sailing it straight toward the Somali coast. Once anchored off the dusty, lawless shores of Hijacked or Ale, the high-speed Hollywood action abruptly stops, and the agonizing waiting game begins. Enter the professional pirate negotiator, often a well-educated local who speaks fluent English and fully understands the complex intricacies of international maritime business. This isn't a chaotic hostage situation from a bank robbery movie. This is a highly calculated, slow-burn corporate negotiation between two massive businesses. On one end of the satellite phone, a pirate standing in the sand. On the other end, a highly paid, stressed crisis management executive sitting in London or New York. They aggressively haggle over the exact price of the ship, the cargo, and the human lives on board. And this process doesn't take days, it takes months. Shipping companies rely heavily on specialized kidnap and ransom insurance policies. These insurance syndicates mathematically calculate the absolute most cost-effective payout. After agonizing months of psychological warfare, a final ransom number is finally agreed upon, usually somewhere between $2 and $5 million in cash. But there are no ATMs in the middle of the ocean. So, how exactly do you securely deliver millions of dollars in cold, hard cash to a hijacked ship? You literally drop it from the sky. A specialized light aircraft flies low over the vessel, tossing out a waterproof, GPS-tracked suitcase. The heavy suitcase splashes down into the ocean. The pirates immediately speed out on their skiffs, eagerly fishing the massive treasure aboard. Before releasing the crew, they actually use modern currency counting machines right there on the deck, checking every single $100 bill for counterfeits. The ultimate payday. Once the money is verified, the pirates pack up and leave. For the exhausted, traumatized crew, the nightmare is finally over. But for the pirates, the party is just beginning. They return to Hijacked as absolute rock stars, buying luxury cars and building mansions on the dusty shores. This massive influx of cash completely supercharged the piracy business model. More money meant better boats, bigger weapons, and more attacks. By 2010, the global economy was bleeding money. Between ransoms, delayed shipments, and damaged goods, piracy was costing the world an estimated $7 billion a year. It got so bad that many shipping companies decided to entirely avoid the Suez Canal, instead taking the massive, expensive detour all the way around the bottom of Africa. Insurance premiums for vessels crossing the Indian Ocean absolutely skyrocketed. And of course, all these massive extra costs were quietly passed down to everyday consumers. The world had finally had enough. In a rare moment of total global agreement, the United Nations Security Council stepped in. They passed a series of unprecedented resolutions, which essentially gave foreign navies the legal green light to enter Somali territorial waters and hunt down the pirates. This led to the creation of Combined Task Force 151, a massive, multinational naval coalition with one single objective: to destroy the piracy business model. Suddenly, the Gulf of Aden saw the largest gathering of international naval power in modern history. It was an absolutely staggering display of military force. The US, NATO, China, Russia, India, geopolitical rivals who normally couldn't even agree on what to have for lunch, were suddenly working side by side. But despite having multi-billion-dollar destroyers and advanced weaponry, the navies faced an incredibly frustrating problem. How do you hunt down a few dozen pirates hiding among thousands of innocent local fishermen? On a radar screen, a pirate skiff and a fishing boat look exactly the same. The navies had to rely on constant helicopter patrols, flying low over every single suspicious boat to visually inspect if they were carrying fishing nets, or AK-47s and ladders. When they did catch pirates in the act, the standoff was almost comical. A multi-million-dollar helicopter hovering over a rusty fiberglass boat. But here was the ultimate legal loophole. The moment the pirates spotted a military patrol, they simply tossed their guns and ladders into the deep ocean. Without any physical evidence of weapons or hijacking equipment on board, international maritime law officially classified them as innocent lost fishermen. The heavily armed international navies literally had to let them go. It became an incredibly frustrating and endless game of catch and release on the high seas. And when they did fight, the cost ratio was completely absurd. Navies were firing advanced, $100,000 guided missiles, just to destroy a stolen, leaking wooden fishing boat that was worth maybe $500. The economics of this war were totally unsustainable. The shipping companies quickly realized they had to take matters into their own hands. Enter the private military contractors, or PMCs. These were highly trained, heavily armed former elite soldiers hired to ride along on commercial vessels. Virtually overnight, vulnerable merchant ships transformed into floating fortresses. Crews installed massive, high-pressure water cannons along the sides of the hull, designed to instantly flood and capsize any small, lightweight skiff that got too close. And then there was the LRAD, a specialized sonic weapon that blasts a highly focused beam of agonizingly loud, piercing sound directly at attackers. So, when a pirate crew approached a cargo ship in 2011, expecting an easy target filled with terrified, unarmed sailors, they were in for a brutal surprise. They were greeted by an impenetrable steel wall. Their crude aluminum hooks simply bounced harmlessly off the thick layers of heavy razor wire. And if they managed to get close, the water cannons unleashed a devastating deluge, instantly swamping their tiny skiffs and ruining their outboard motors. If they stubbornly kept trying to attack, the professional security contractors would calmly step up, taking tactical positions behind fortified sandbags. They didn't even need to aim for the pirates themselves. A few precise, heavy-caliber warning shots fired directly into the water, right next to the engine block. And the attack was instantly over, facing highly trained, heavily armed snipers instead of terrified civilian sailors. The pirates panicked and fled. The combination of international naval patrols and heavily armed private security contractors was an absolute game changer. The results were immediate and incredibly dramatic. In 2011, Somali pirates successfully hijacked over 40 massive vessels. But just a few short years later, that number plummeted to absolute zero. Back in Hijacked, the booming piracy economy collapsed overnight. The infamous pirate stock exchange crashed completely, leaving arrogant investors with absolutely worthless shares. The business model relied entirely on easy, unarmed targets. The moment the ships started fighting back with lethal force, the profit margins completely vanished. The golden age of Somali piracy had officially come to an end. The ocean highways were finally safe for global trade once again. But, before we celebrate this massive victory, we need to ask a very uncomfortable question. Did we actually solve the real problem? The harsh reality is that the international community didn't cure the disease. They merely treated the violent symptoms with guns and barbed wire. Because while the warships patrol the deep ocean, the dark root causes of piracy back on land haven't changed one single bit. With the armed pirates gone, those massive, illegal foreign fishing trawlers quietly returned, once again stealing the local marine resources with absolute impunity. And it gets much worse. For decades, foreign companies have illegally dumped highly toxic chemical waste right off the unguarded Somali coastline. Local fishermen are still struggling with extreme poverty, completely destroyed ecosystems, and a collapsed state that simply cannot protect its own people. Meanwhile, the multinational naval armada costs billions of dollars every single year to maintain. It is the most expensive security guard deployment in human history. But shipping companies and global governments prefer paying for this expensive band-aid, rather than investing the time and effort into actually rebuilding the failed nation of Somalia. As long as the coastal communities remain utterly desperate and hungry, the fundamental economic incentive to return to piracy will always secretly exist. The pirates haven't disappeared, they are simply waiting in the shadows, like a massive, ticking time bomb sitting just off the Horn of Africa. To this day, the multinational naval task force is still out there, endlessly circling the ocean, burning through millions of dollars in fuel every single week. Because if you only treat the violent symptoms without curing the actual disease, the problem simply evolves. Or it packs up and moves somewhere else. While the waters of Somalia remain relatively quiet for now, modern piracy has heavily shifted to other vulnerable, unstable regions, like the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa, or the crowded Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia. It proves a terrifyingly simple, universal economic equation. Whenever you have completely desperate, starving people living right next to $1 trillion, unprotected highway of global trade, somebody is eventually going to build a ladder. The story of the Somali pirates isn't just a crazy Hollywood action movie. It is a stark warning about the extreme, hidden costs of ignoring collapsed states. Ultimately, we all pay the price for that piracy, every single time you buy a new flat-screen TV or a pair of imported sneakers. A tiny fraction of that exact cost goes to paying heavily armed mercenaries to guard ships in the Indian Ocean. It's the bizarre, interconnected reality of our modern globalized world. And until the root causes of desperate poverty and illegal exploitation are permanently solved, the dark shadow of the pirates will never truly disappear from the sea. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into the absurd business of modern piracy. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another crazy historical deep dive. We've got plenty more wild stories coming your way. Want to know how a single hacker took down a nuclear facility? Click the video on the left to watch our episode on Stuxnet. Or, if you prefer massive military blunders, check out the video on the right about the absurd invasion of Grenada. As always, stay curious, keep exploring history, and I will see you all in the next adventure.